One of the interesting commentators on social media is this guy, Mike Cernovich. And I like Cernovich because he is unpredictable. He is a guy who thinks for himself. He is also bold. He says what he thinks, and he doesn't really worry too much about the consequences. He came out for Trump at a time when there were so many people who would consider you to be an extremist or a kook for supporting Trump. He didn't hesitate to do that. So in that sense, he was one of the early Trumpsters. On the other hand, he's been kind of a fierce advocate for DeSantis. He seemed to be moving in the direction of DeSantis over Trump. But then when Trump had his first indictment, this was the Alvin Bragg case, Cernovich kind of pivoted back and said, wait a minute, this abuse of Trump is so over the top. We sort of have to rally to Trump's defense. And he was also becoming a little skeptical of the way DeSantis was handling the way in which Trump was being treated by the left. So this is a guy who's worth following and worth reading. By the way, his Twitter handle is just @Cernovich. And what I want to do today is discuss a recent tweet that he put out that has to do with Reagan. And I'm discussing it in part because Cernovich is interesting, but in part also because I think it does reflect a wider revisionism among some Trumpsters. And the idea here is that Reagan was really not that good. Reagan was a, well, okay president at best, and Trump was, much better than Reagan. So let me read the quotation, which again is written in Cernovich's somewhat characteristic hyperbole, but nevertheless makes the point. Other than look handsome, what did Ronald Reagan do? So let's start there. The assumption here is that Reagan's only virtue was his good looks, and he didn't really do anything else. So let's look at the details here. What did Reagan do? And then Cernovich goes on to say what Reagan did. Amnesty, meaning for illegals, consulted astrologers, cult magic. By the way, not true. Reagan never consulted an astrologer. It came out in Kitty Kelly's biography, I believe, of Nancy Reagan, that Nancy Reagan consulted astrologers. So this is not Reagan. 3, gun control. 4, appointed liberal Supreme Court justices. Again, not really true. Reagan appointed Scalia. That was his first appointment. Liberal, really? I don't even think Cernovich thinks that. But then in the second round, Reagan appointed, I guess it was Anthony Kennedy, right? Was it Kennedy? Sandra Day O'Connor. And Sandra Day O'Connor turned out to be unreliable. So let's just say Reagan, had a mixed record on the Supreme Court. Quote, let the CIA traffic cocaine and crack. Here, I think the key word is let. And I actually don't even know what he's talking about here. But and then he goes, Trump was far superior as POTUS by results. It's not even a debate. Well, what were the results? In the case of Trump, you had a good economy. But in the case of Reagan, you had a fantastic economy. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was 800 in 1982. Right after Reagan came to office, it was, I think, 3,400. So it multiplied 4 times under Reagan. And so there was a Reagan boom, which, by the way, continued into the 1990s. But this is not my point to kind of quibble with the details of Cernovich's indictment. It's that he really misses the big picture. And that is that there are certain times in American history where really important issues come to the forefront. And it makes no sense for a president who's dealing with the main issues to be then faulted retroactively for not dealing with other clearly more minor issues. It's kind of like if someone were to make a case against Lincoln. Lincoln was not a very good president. He was wrong on tariffs. He opposed Texas's entry into the Union. Well, maybe so. But the fundamental issue for Lincoln was slavery, was the giant crisis that ultimately culminated in the Civil War. And if Lincoln was right on that, what sense does it make to then fault him on the other issues, which were not his primary focus, and rightly so? Same with Reagan. Reagan was focused on the Cold War. Did he or did he not play a critical role in ending the Cold War? Yes. Gorbachev played a role, Pope John Paul did, Margaret Thatcher did, Lech Walesa did, but the primary mover was Reagan. By the way, if you doubt this, look at my book, Ronald Reagan, How an Ordinary Man Became an Extraordinary Leader. Similarly, Reagan was focused on stagflation, in other words, getting an economy, similar, by the way, to the one we're headed toward, stagnant growth and inflation. How do you break the back of inflation and kick off the engine of economic growth? It's not easy to do it. Reagan did it. So Reagan was focused. Reagan believed that you can't change the world in 30 ways. You can change the world in 2, maybe 3 ways. And so he focused on the Soviet Union. He focused on reviving the economy. He focused on reviving patriotism. He focused on mobilizing the Reagan doctrine to support freedom movements around the world. And if he did that, and he did all that successfully, the rest of it is just trivialities.